my crew. Hope you guys have all been doing well. We are finally back in the beautiful state of Virginia on this Memorial Day 2024, simply looking out for a lot of trains. On this day, where I would finally have a break from work, I decided to hit the Blue Ridge District, one of the many lines that runs in and out of Roanoke, Virginia, in search for catching a train over this bridge, which I had scouted a few days prior while I was just driving around exploring the area. And fortunately for me, with Virginia being Virginia, I would relatively quickly find something coming over this structure here. This train is 820 something. I honestly don't remember the specific ID. In case you aren't aware, there is a lot of export coal that runs east on this line towards Lambert's Point in Norfolk, Virginia, where Norfolk Southern runs a huge operation to unload these coal trains onto barges to get shipped out. And typically, NS will run 2 loaded trains and then run back a singular empty train that's a combo of 2 previous loaded trains that got empty. And the train before us here happens to be one of those trains. I honestly don't remember which one it was. All I do remember is that it's heading towards somewhere in Western Virginia. As you can imagine, seeing this shot, it's kind of constricted. There wasn't really too much to see once the locomotives passed. So shortly after those 2 units were gone, I decided to leave and begin a little impromptu chase down the Blue Ridge District just to see what shots I could find and eventually stop at a crossing. After about 10 minutes of driving through this beautiful landscape, I would finally find myself at this automated crossing, one of the first ones on this district that lies outside of Roanoke, Virginia. As I was filming this train, I was noticing that its speed was decreasing, and before I knew it, it was stopped. What an absolute tragedy. And remember how I said that this was a combination train of 2 loaded coal trains? Yes. Yeah, there was still plenty of trains to roll past this grade crossing, and I was just gonna have to wait until this thing moved. So in the meantime, I actually tried turning around on this row to see if I could find an exit. And I don't know if you guys have ever driven somewhere where every single time you try to redirect, it's telling you to turn around. 5 minutes. Turn around and die. 10 minutes. 15 minutes later. Turn around and die. So I would find myself back at this crossing, hearing dispatch bicker with the crew on this train. That was kind of funny. And eventually discovering that this train was being stopped for another train that wasn't even going to run this line. It was taking the Alta Vista district. So I wasn't going to be able to see that. But fortunately, 20 minutes after the initial stop of this train, I would finally see this train depart as it continues further westward into Virginia. From here, I decided to continue towards downtown Roanoke. I'd kind of already been following this train towards that area and was hoping to see whatever I could find. This train actually ended up stopping again, but with Roanoke being Roanoke, there was something else running. Upon arriving here, I would see Norfolk Southern 19W coming off the Winston-Salem district, but I wasn't really too pressed on that. It had some pretty standard GE power. What really had me intrigued were two other trains that were set to come through Roanoke today. One of them was Norfolk Southern 6W4 and the other being 60U. But those of you who know NS train IDs know that these are definitely bulk movements. Bulk movements that would either be going to or coming from different railroads. 6W4 would be coming east down the Whitethorn district and 60U would be coming from the Alta Vista district. And I was hoping to see both of them. Unfortunately, when I tapped into my resources, I saw 6W4's location and I knew that there was no way I was going to see this. So all that left me with, unfortunately, was to see 60U, which was kind of far away. So I would have to wait over 40 minutes before finally the gates next to be activated and I would finally see 60U with an anticipated special contest. Disappointment is all I could say, truly. How on earth does a train get 60U as an ID and I'm looking at 3 NSGEs? Oh my goodness, I hate this city, bro. What an absolute colossal waste of my life. 40 minutes for this? A DC Gevo? And 2 C6Ms?
Disgusting black creatures.
Oh my lord. This train is actually carrying phosphate loads that are going up to Chicago, Illinois. So I knew that basically all the cars were going to be the same and I really had no more interest in filming this thing. So once the head end passed, I would leave this spot and actually begin heading over to the Winston-Salem district. It's currently about 4:30 at this point, and I noticed that Amtrak was nowhere to be found. And given the time of day it is, Amtrak would have ran these rails where 60U is passing by right now, and I would have seen it because I was sitting here the whole time. So since they hadn't, the only two spots that they could have been were either at the Amtrak station or at the pull-off that lies next to the main line on the Winston-Salem side. So with 60U doing nothing for my dopamine, I decided to head over to the Winston-Salem side to see what I could find.
Excuse me?
What am I looking at? If only y'all could have seen the reaction on my face upon witnessing this Norfolk Southern locomotive sitting next to Amtrak in the pull-off. I was baffled. I truly had no idea what was going on, but all I did know is that something bad was happening. This is an Amtrak special, if you will. And to further add to my confusion, not even 10 minutes after I had first passed this weird consist, the NS locomotive on the end actually left the pull-off.
What?
And so seeing where it was going, I decided to follow it down the street, and I would find myself right back at the Y, where this NS-9 was preparing to use this Y in a way that, up until this point, I had never seen any other train use it before. So as you can imagine, I am incredibly lost. But very fortunately for me, there actually happened to be another train enthusiast out here, a very friendly old man by the name of Felix, shout out you man, who had been watching all of this tomfoolery play out and started filling me on what exactly was going on. And it's kind of a lot, so I'm gonna need you to stick with me. Alright, so Pete, for those of you who watched the first Roanoke video I uploaded, I sort of explained how Amtrak is a little bit weird.
What do you mean by that?
The Amtrak trains that run through this part of the country are part of the Northeast Regional Service, which, as you can assume, operates in the Northeast region of the United States. And usually, when an Amtrak train stops at a station, it continues in the same direction that it was going when it first came into the station. However, if we look at the map, we can see that there's a dead end on the Northeast Regional Service, this dead end being in Roanoke, Virginia. So Amtrak heavily relies on the Y that lies in the city in order for the operations to work. Amtrak will come into the city from the east off of the Bluish district, drop off with the passengers, reverse over the Y so that it can then go down to take the Winston-Salem district and enter that pull-off. Once the eastbound train is ready for departure, the previous Amtrak consist that came in will back out of the pull-off and take the Y so that the train is now actually facing east, load up passengers in the station, and then it'll depart in the same way that it came in originally, going up the Bluish district on its way to more stations throughout the Northeast United States. Now, if you go to Amtrak's website, there are about 50 trains that are running the Northeast Regional Service on a given day, but typically only 5 of these are actually relevant to Roanoke. There's a night train, an early morning train, an early afternoon train, a late afternoon train, and then another night train. The first night train comes in from the east off the Bouge district and pulls in headfirst into the station. Once they drop off all the passengers, they will back up over the Y so that they can go down the Winston-Salem side and enter the pull-off that lies just next to the Norfolk Southern main line. There, that consist will sit until the morning when the morning Amtrak train is ready to depart. That morning Amtrak train will use the same consist from the night train that came in the night before and reverse out of the pull-off and reverse up the Y so that it reverses tail end into the station. That way, the train is already facing east for its departure out of Roanoke. Later in the day, in the early afternoon, another Amtrak train will come in from the Bouge district, head first into the station, drop off the passengers, reverse off into the Y, and then enter the pull-off on the Winston-Salem side, before the late afternoon train will use the same consist from the early afternoon train. Once again, backing up out of the pull-off, up the Y, and tail first into the station so that it's facing east for when it needs to leave Roanoke. And then, later in the night, another night train will come in and do the same thing as the first night train. And despite the fact that the number of trains on the Northeast Regional Service may vary and the IDs may switch between days, this is the typical rotation of trains in and out of Roanoke. Night, early morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, and night again. 5 trains coming in through 24 hours over the span of 2 different dates to ensure that there's always a cycle of trains that run in and out of the city, despite Roanoke being a dead end for Amtrak. And in order to understand today's debacle, our focus will be on the morning and afternoon trains, Amtrak 156 and Amtrak 66. So, the day before today, Amtrak had come in late in the night as normal, gone into the station, dropped off his passengers, and then reversed over the Y, and they headed down to the pull-off on the Winston-Salem side. And then, the next morning, the early morning Amtrak train was scheduled, and they began reversing out of the pull-off to head back towards the station. Except that, in fact, did not happen. For whatever reason, somehow, between last night and this morning, yesterday's late-night Amtrak train had gone into the pull-off, and the power that was sitting there decided to pull a funny one and enter the eternal plane. The unit was dead, unavailable. I didn't hear what exactly went wrong, and to this day, I still don't know. And I'm certain mechanical got called out, but they were not able to resolve the issue before the afternoon. And of course, as you could imagine, this would inevitably create a backup, because by the time that the early afternoon train had come into the station, it was able to drop off all its passengers, but it had to stay in the station because the pull-off was so occupied with yesterday's late-night Amtrak train. And to be frank, I really should have noticed this from the rail cam footage that I put in the video earlier.
What are you talking about?
This footage was from around 3:15, 3:30, and Amtrak should not be in the station right now. And at the time of recording, I wasn't really privy to that. So now at this point, it's been almost 8 hours since 156 was supposed to depart Roanoke, and there were still passengers that were supposed to leave this morning. And on top of this, now the late afternoon Amtrak train, Amtrak 66, was set to be late, creating an even bigger backup of people looking to leave Roanoke on Amtrak. And this is how Norfolk Southern got involved and how we came across that scene of that solo NS-9 in the pull-off behind Amtrak. The first part of the plan was having Norfolk Southern run up to the Amtrak pull-off where Amtrak 156 consist was still sitting. From here, they would couple up to the consist so that they could pull the passenger cars away while leaving that dead Amtrak motor still sitting in the pull-off. And this is why when we had driven by that scene, that Norfolk Southern unit was seen coupled up to the Amtrak cars, and there was that solo Amtrak unit, the one that had died, sitting in the siding, not coupled to the cars.
You serve zero purpose.
The second part of the plan explains why we shortly saw that NS-9 leave the pull-off and begin reversing towards downtown Roanoke. With Amtrak 156 cars and the motor being separated, this solo NS unit would now need to run up to the Y so that it could use the Y to face towards the Amtrak station. And that's how we find ourselves here at the present moment, sitting next to good old Mr. Felix and catching Norfolk Southern 9722 with the Amtrak crew on it at this point, utilizing this seldom used trackage of the Y to begin reversing to face towards the Amtrak station. Shortly after crossing the switch, this light unit would begin passing us once more as it begins running towards the Amtrak station. As I had mentioned before, the early afternoon Amtrak train was still sitting at the station because the pull-off was occupied with this morning's train. So the plan was for this Norfolk Southern unit to actually run around the early afternoon train, couple up to the head end of it, and then reverse the whole train back across the Y and back towards the pull-off. Once they reach the pull-off, the early afternoon's consist and this morning's consist would combine. So the early morning train and the early afternoon train would be coupled together to form a combined late afternoon train. This combination being done to both move those passenger cars out of the pull-off and to also accommodate for the higher volume of passengers that, as of this point, are all late. So now that I had kind of gotten the drift of what was going on, I tried pulling up to the Amtrak station because I wanted to see if I could capture this unit coupling up to the Amtrak train and departing. And let me tell you, that was a mistake. Bad traffic, bad parking, and before I knew it, I was seeing this Norfolk Southern Amtrak amalgamation down the street and reversing out of sight. Fortunately, as I would have guessed, they were crawling through the city, and I would just manage to catch them reversing as the crew was still in the process of building this combined Amtrak 66. Shortly after the power passed here, we could see the train reversing just a little bit as the early morning and early afternoon passenger cars were combined to form the extended afternoon Amtrak 66. And about 20 minutes later, with this train now having clearance, Amtrak 66, with its extended cut of passenger cars and this Norfolk Southern unit, departed the pull-off and began approaching us. I gotta say, this is definitely not something that you see every day. And with this being an incredibly rare move, I already know that some of y'all fools have completely missed the plot. You're looking at this footage of an NS engine leading an Amtrak train, and all you see is Dash 9, thoroughbred, leading Amtrak, foam is uncontrollable. Let me introduce something to you foaming degenerates called perspective. So, as we all know, Amtrak, Amtrak carries passengers. Passengers being people that have places to be. Could be family, could be business, could be whatever. But there are people, individuals like you and myself, that are just trying to get from point A to point B. So when seeing this debacle unfold right before our eyes, and knowing that these trains are late, you know who's getting delayed? People! Let me remind y'all, it is Memorial Day 2024. It is almost 6 p.m. at this point. The early morning Amtrak 156 was supposed to have departed here almost 9 hours ago. And now, since the early morning and early afternoon consists had to be combined to form the late afternoon Amtrak 66, now the passengers for Amtrak 66 were now also being delayed by about an hour. Imagine being on a family trip or something, and you just trying to leave Roanoke. You wake up early, you get to the station at 8 a.m., and then you get there and you're like, yeah, my fault, gang. The train broke. This may be cool for us with cameras to witness, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who are getting very delayed today. And even more unfortunate is that I'm here to film all of it. Back to the train, they were waiting for clearance so that they could actually get onto the Y, because the Y does hit the Blue Ridge District main line, and there was still regular Norfolk Southern traffic running through the area. So me, Felix, and a father and son that I pulled up, I definitely forgot y'all names, I'm so sorry. We were all sitting here waiting before 5 minutes later, the locomotives began notching up and Amtrak 66 began departing to head towards the Y. As you can see from this footage, Amtrak 66 is actually taking the right leg of the Y, which is not normal. Usually, when I see Amtrak trains reversing into the station, they're taking the left leg of the Y. And the reason for this change is because when Amtrak is reversing into the station, as in the head end is on the opposite side of the train, they're able to just back up directly into the station. But because this Norfolk Southern Amtrak combo had to reverse to the cars on the pull-off and then already be facing towards the station, they needed to take the right leg of the Y and pull the whole train across the switch, so that from there, they could reverse the whole train back into the station. Because the passengers for this Amtrak 66 combo at this point still have not boarded the train yet. I didn't realize this at the time though, so when I had seen this train taking the right leg of the Y, I immediately left, assuming that they were about to depart Roanoke and hit the Blue Ridge District. So I hit the road, quickly overtook them, not knowing what was going on, but I would quickly soon discover what exactly was happening, because before I could even leave this city, in typical Roanoke fashion, a random intermodal train popped up out of nowhere. As this intermodal train's power goes west through the city, I could see them passing by Amtrak 66, and I saw Amtrak reversing, but it still hadn't clicked in my head yet that they were reversing to go back towards the station. I just saw that they were going away from where I was headed, so I decided to turn around and follow them down the street in curiosity. At this point, now that I had completely cleared the Amtrak train, the tail end of the intermodal was in front of me, and I was at the Y, I understood that Amtrak 66 was reversing into the station. So realizing that there was nothing left for me in the city, I elected to leave and pushed back towards the Blue Ridge District where I'd been earlier, getting here early and waiting for Amtrak 66 to eventually pass. Returning back to CP Webster, which we had actually passed by earlier in the day, because I had decent parking, good lighting, and a nice signal bridge for me to catch the train passing by.
Nice.
And since this is a little ways out of Roanoke, I would have to wait about 30 minutes before finally the gates activated and this Amtrak 66 combo with passengers either 2 or 10 hours late finally leaves Roanoke and begins heading up to its next stops. Well, that was definitely a mess. A premium Amtrak disaster class, if you will. But fortunately, at this point, it had been cleared to the best that they could have done. Amtrak was out of Roanoke, and now all I was left with was my regularly scheduled Norfolk Southern action.
Sensational.
Within 10 minutes of Amtrak passing, Norfolk Southern 19M out of Crewe, Virginia, and heading up to Indiana, shortly came pushing west past me with a very nice leader on the front. This wouldn't be the end of my activity here at Webster, because within 20 minutes, a familiar symbol to me from Georgia, Norfolk Southern 289, promptly came rolling by me on its way down to Tennessee. You truly never know what you'll find on the rails. And as for me, a day that was pretty boring turned out to be very eventful very quickly. I hope that you guys enjoyed this adventure, and until next time, God bless. I will see you soon, out on the highway. Which is what I would be telling you goons, if on my way back to my apartment, I didn't happen to drive under a bridge and see the Conrail Heritage unit just sitting there.
I can't believe this.
So I quickly made a pull off and got a good view of the Big Blue just sitting on top of this old Norfolk and Western bridge. This unit is actually serving as the rear train DPU on Norfolk Southern 11Z off the Roanoke District, a line which, if you remember from my first Roanoke video, I mentioned is very dead. And honestly, I don't even know what's crazier, the fact that I happened to see a train on this line, or the fact that this unit was serving as rear train DPU and was perfectly parked right over this bridge. I'm assuming that this train had stopped here because Roanoke Yard was full or they needed to crew change or something. It really could have been anything. But regardless, I was very pleased to see this out of nowhere. This was a very wonderful surprise.
Incredible.
And to add on to the tale of surprises, I was made aware that there was yet another train that was about to leave Roanoke. So from this bridge, I would leave 11Z and return back to the Blue Ridge District side to catch this loaded eastbound coal train making its way out of Roanoke. Believe it or not, the train that's parked here is actually the 19M that we had seen at CP Webster, which appeared to have stopped for fuel right outside the Roanoke Yard before eventually departing and continuing on its way. And it would be here, driving down Shenandoah Avenue, passing these locomotives as they go off into the sunset, that I would finally end off this event for Memorial Day, where truly anything but the expected happened. I hope you guys learned something new. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and until next time, my friends, God bless. I will see you soon, out on the high iron.